Hi, everybody. I'm Megan Powell from the Essex Bridge Center. In this video, we're going to talk about the first part of how to score your hands in a bridge game. And that's going to be true whether you play in a live bridge game or if you play in an online bridge game. The first part that we're going to talk about is something called calculating a raw score. So let's get started. We play a version of bridge called duplicate bridge. Now, what does that mean? What is duplicate bridge? Duplicate bridge is a version of bridge where each table is playing the same boards as every other table. And then your table is compared to every other table on that board and on each board, all right? More specifically, you and your partner, let's say you're seated north and south. You are being compared directly head to head opposite every other north-south because they will have seen the same boards you have. They will have had the exact same cards you had. So your real competition are those other people in these other north-south seats. Now, I want to first talk about duplicate bridge in the brick and mortar world. Some of you have never been inside of a live bridge club, right? So let's make sure that I center some general three-dimensional kind of concepts here. So here's a picture of our Essex Bridge Center on a day when we had a lot of tables in the room. And actually, our Essex Bridge Center Live Club had 2 rooms. This was one of the rooms. And you can see there are a bunch of tables here, right? I blurred faces to protect identities. You should notice that there are a lot of tables and there are 4 people per table. Everybody's playing bridge here. Now notice the players are seated across from each other and they are each other's partners. Now that should not be a new concept to you. Even in the digital world, you know that your partner is seated across from you. You have players on other sides of you and those are your opponents. They are each other's partner, right? Now that's also something that should not be too foreign. Now, I want to look a little more carefully at the table where the players are seated. I'm going to look at this first table right up front here. I want to focus on the actual table surface. So what's going on here? If you've never been in a live bridge club, this is going to look a little different than what you're used to. First of all, notice people are actually physically holding something called cards. Oh my goodness. Some of you have never done that in bridge. People are holding their physical cards. And that's actually what we do, right? In a real live bridge situation. In the middle of this table in the picture is a pink plastic container. We call that a board. And it's where the playing cards are stored. And I don't know if you can see my little picture on your screen, but I'm holding up one of those boards here. The one on the table is pink. The one I'm holding is red. They come in all different colors. At our in-person live bridge club, we had 17 sets of boards in different colors, and every set has 36 boards in it. That's a lot. We had to find a lot of storage room for boards. 36 boards make up a set of boards. We had 17 or 18 sets of boards in our live bridge center because we played so many games, even in a day. Now, also on this table, do you see the red box? It has little plastic cards in it. This is the bidding box in a live bridge world. It has little plastic cards. You would take your cards out of the bidding box and make your bids one by one, actually touching them and putting them on the table. There are also, if you look, cards, playing cards face up on this table. That's the dummy. Okay. When we play in a live bridge club, the dummy goes down on the table for everyone to see, similarly to what you're used to in the digital world. In a live bridge club, in duplicate bridge, what happens is because you can all talk to each other and you're all live looking at each other's faces, the declarer tells dummy what card to play. Dummy then pulls that card out of that pile and places it in front of her dummy area behind the cards. So the dummy still makes no decisions, but dummy is allowed to touch the cards because declarer will tell dummy what card to play from the table. Now, in the real bridge world, players take their 13 cards out of that pink plastic board. The cards are already set up for a game. The director of the game has already pre-made all the hands. They take their cards out of their own individual slots and they put them in order, and then they start bidding and playing. All right. Now, that pink plastic board holding the 52 cards looks a little like this. I've made a bigger picture of it for you. This one happens to be orange. The other one was pink. There are 4 pockets. There are 13 cards in each pocket, one for each person. And in the middle of this thing is a label. Now let me zero in on this label. I see that number 3 in the middle of that label. So let's zero in on that. But before we do that, well, no, I can do that too. You're also going to see a geographical designation on that label. And you see who is the dealer. So the other thing you're going to see here is you will see that the label might have some red coloring in the geographic areas. For instance, you should be able to see that east and west are in red. North and south are not. Now, I'm going to talk about that red coloring in another couple of minutes. We're going to come back to it. And I'll give you, at that time, a close-up of that label, and we'll talk a little bit more about it. So again, live bridge world, you get this board in the middle of the table. Players take their 13 cards out of the little slot. The auction begins. They use those red boxes that you're looking at in the picture as bidding boxes. You'll take your bids out of the box, put them on the table. When you're done bidding, all the bidding cards go back in the red box. One partnership bids to a contract, and then one partnership becomes declared dummy. The other partnership are the defense. One of the opponents makes an opening lead. That dummy goes face up on the table for everyone to see. All right. And now we play our bridge hand in a live world. So some of you have never been in a live bridge club before. But what I've just talked about should sound a little bit familiar, even if you've only played in a digital world. In our digital world, let's just line up those pieces with what we have seen more recently. This is a picture of the shark screen. All right. This is how your digital bridge table appears. BBO has a similar look as you know at this point, right? But in this picture, you're going to see your cards at the bottom of the screen. It does not matter whether you are north, south, or east, or west. Your cards will always be at the bottom of the screen. So you always have to check to see which geographic person you are. You might be west and still see your cards at the bottom, and you have to stop thinking you might be south. So you'll also see your cards already arranged. I've got to tell you, the one thing I actually like about the digital world versus the live world is it does not take people 4 minutes to put their cards, physical cards, in order at the bridge table. It's already done. Now, the other thing you see is you see a bidding box, a simulated bidding box to your far right, and you've used that before. That's not new. In the upper left-hand corner, you see a poker, something that looks like a poker chip, right? In that poker chip, you see the board number 1. You'll also see who the dealer is. And as you're looking at this, you see the dealers up the top. That would be in the north slot. North, south, east, west, right? That tells you who the dealer is. I also would like you to look at that poker chip and notice that it is all white. There is no other color in that chip, which I'll talk about a little more in a minute. You know who is going to play first and next because the tabletop area will be a specific color if it's your turn. And in the middle of the screen, you always know whose turn it is to bid because of the question mark you see. All right. You manipulate your bids and play your cards using your mouse or your finger. And all of that you've done before, right? So that's how we translate the live into digital. Now, let's talk about scoring a little bit. When we talk about scoring a bridge hand, it is actually in sections. It's not just a one thing that we do to end up with a total score at the end of a game. All right. We have to start off someplace called raw scoring, which is what we will focus on here. In our next lesson, we will take raw scoring further. And in our third lesson, we will take that whole piece further still. So the first job in scoring is to calculate a raw score on any given hand that you finish. Now, if you're newer to bridge, you've never even thought about it. If you've only played online, the computer has done all the work for you. You've never even thought about it. In the brick and mortar world, what we have done in the past when we were live is in our lowest level games, you would score on paper, on a piece of paper, in order to force you to think about what the score is and how you got there. We make you do the calculation when you finish playing a bridge hand to try and get you to really get that in your head. When you move up in experience in a live bridge club, and I don't have one in front of me to show you, I'm sorry, you would move on to something called a handheld scoring device, an electronic little baby computer in which you do the scoring electronically. And it would go into our master computer, and then it would calculate for you. So if we play in a digital environment, you don't see any of the process. You just see a score, right? In class, in our shark hands in class, you know how you get that score at the end on your screen? And I've always said to you, just bat it away. Well, the computer has calculated that for you, but you didn't know how you got plus 420 or minus 110. So that's the piece we want to do now, because it's really important that players learn how scoring works as part of learning to play the game. What learning to score will do for you is it will help you start figuring out the process of how to bid. If you can project ahead to what a likely score might be for you, it will help you make decisions in the bidding process. Now, some of you have taken classes, let's say specifically in something called Preemptive Openings and Overcalls. Some of you still have that lesson coming ahead of you in the next, actually, couple of weeks, bunch of weeks. Preemptive openings and overcalls are indeed a place where you start thinking about what score is tolerable for me, what is worth my time here. And you might make a bidding decision based on your understanding of what the possibilities are. So let's say that you and I are partners, all right? You're seated north, I'm your partner, I'm south, and you are the declarer on board one. Now, every other north in the room, whether it's a digital room or it's a live room, every other north is going to play board one, and every other north is going to see the exact same cards on board one that you see, all right? So your job as north on board one is to bid as well as you can based on what you know from the auction, and then to play that hand as well as you can. Your job is to try and earn a high positive score on this board, because every other north looking at your hand, the same hand, is your actual competition. It's absolutely true that at your table, you want to beat the pants off of the people on either side of you, right? Your opponents. You absolutely want to cream them, but that's not really your main job. The reason you're trying to cream them is so that you get a nice high score so that you can compete well against the other norths who are declared on board one and looking at your same score. So you want to bid better, you want to play better than every other north who is the declarer on board one. You want to earn a higher positive score than all those other folks. So part of learning to score is going to lead you down the road to figuring out how high you should even bid. All right. So understanding how bridge scoring works, not just in this session, but in our other scoring workshop sessions, is going to help you decide how to bid. Makes the game more interesting. All right. So really, what it's going to help you understand is how the competition aspect comes into play. So let's say that we're seated at a table, live or digital. We're playing our bridge hands, and we finish playing a particular hand. Now, this is where page 1 of the handout is going to come into play. You are going to determine a raw score at the end of this hand. You either made your contract if you were the declarer, or you were down in your contract if you were the declarer. Scoring occurs from the perspective of the declarer. So when you look at page 1, and you might even make this annotation if it's not already on there, on page 1 of this handout, you should see the calculating raw scores pieces, top of that page 1, bottom of that page 1. The top is talking about making your contract. And if it's not annotated for you, it should be annotated from declarer's perspective. We only care how declarer does on this hand. Everybody else will take care of themselves as we sort out declarer's outcome. So when it says making your contract, it's talking about declarer making the contract that they bid. They earned the right to play. They earned the contract. How did they do? If they made their contract, we will use that information up top. Now, if the declarer did not make the contract, down the bottom of page 1, that's the section is, did you not make your contract? And again, that is declarer's perspective. Did the declarer not make the intended contract? All right. Now, another thing you see on page 1 is you see the word vul in a lot of different places. You see it up top, you see it down the bottom. So I want to talk a little bit about vulnerability. All right. So let's talk about vulnerability. What is it? Let's go back to that board I showed you earlier. The orange board has cards in it, has a label on it. Vulnerability is a concept in bridge that makes each hand just a little bit more interesting. It will affect your bidding at times. You will make decisions based on whether you're vulnerable or not at times. It also affects scoring at the end of the hand. Vulnerability matters when it comes to scoring a lot of the time. Now, this is the board I showed you earlier, and I'm going to zero in on that label. So if we look closely at this label, we notice that it is board number 3. Remember, I said that we have 36 boards in each set. So I had an orange set of 36 boards. This is board number 3. Boards are numbered. You've noticed that in our lessons, right? You've gone board 1, board 2, board 3. And now I want to talk about the more specific aspects on this label. East and West are marked in red. And that means East and West are vulnerable on this board. Now, vulnerability rotates in a pattern so that everybody gets a chance at vulnerability. In order to maybe understand this just a little more clearly, here are the labels from the first 8 boards in any set. It doesn't matter what color the set is, whether it's orange boards, red boards, pink boards, light blue boards. There are sets of 36 boards that come in lots of different colors. Every board 1 is going to look the same. Every board 2's label is going to look the same. It's the same from set to set. So when you look at the first 4 labels here, notice that on board 1, nobody's in red. And that means nobody is vulnerable. Take a look at board number 2. On this board, North and South are red. They are vulnerable. East and West are not in red. They are not vulnerable. On board 3, East and West are in red. North and South are not. East and West are vulnerable. And when you look at board 4, you will notice that everyone is in red. Everyone is vulnerable on board 4. Now, when we move on to boards 5 through 8, I want you to see if you can see how the pattern changes. It might help if you could also see board 9 to see the progress. But here's what I'm hoping you notice. On board 5, North and South are vulnerable. Board 6, East and West are vulnerable. 7, everyone is. On 8, nobody is. So what happens is that the pattern from the first board here comes out, drops down to the end, everything moves up 1, right? 2 and 5 are North-South vulnerable. 3 and 6, East-West vulnerable. 4, 7, everyone's vulnerable. 1 comes, that vulnerability comes down the end and becomes the vulnerability on board 8. And that's how it sort of shuffles throughout all 36 boards. It sort of moves in this pattern. Now, people are going to ask me, why do I care about vulnerability? It makes the game interesting. There are no rules about why somebody's vulnerable. It is based strictly on a rotating pattern on a set of 36 boards. That's all it is. There's not, you're vulnerable because today's a Thursday. It is based on the board number and whether that board number, what the pattern of vulnerability is on that particular board number. All right. Now, when you're vulnerable, you might make bidding choices a little more thoughtfully. For example, if you think you are close to game, you should bid game. Why? Because when you are vulnerable and you play that vulnerable hand well, and you make your game contract, you are going to get hundreds of extra points in the scoring just for having bid game. And we'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. All right. So when you are vulnerable, it can indeed impact how you bid. For some of you, you have already learned some different bids in bridge where you have to be thoughtful about vulnerability. For instance, preemptive weak openings. Some of you are going to have that kind of a series coming up very soon in your lessons. And there are other kinds of bidding in bridge where you think more thoughtfully because of vulnerability. But vulnerability will absolutely affect the scoring at the end of the hand. What about in our digital world? When you don't have an actual physical board, what do you see? Well, in the digital world, this is what vulnerability will look like. If we're in Shark, board 1, nobody is ever vulnerable on a board 1. So you don't see any redness in this poker chip, right? You also, in the middle of the screen where it shows you whose turn it is to bid, notice that's all white. If we were to go look at board 2 in Shark, you would notice that north and south in the poker chip are in red. And notice in the middle of the screen in the bidding area, north and south are in red. That's how you know if you're vulnerable or not. So now that we have seen what this looks like in the real world, and we've had a little glimpse into it on the digital world, now we want to move into the concept of how to score a bridge hand. And I'm going to move to page 3 in your packet. Still keep page 1 on the side. You're going to need it. First of all, game contracts score better than partial contracts. What's a partial contract? A partial game contract is when you did not bid all the way to 4 hearts or 4 spades or 3 no trump. You're someplace lower in a contract. You're in 2 hearts. You're in 1 no trump. So you didn't have enough points between the two of you to go all the way to game, or you might have had the points, but you just didn't do it. So a partial game contract is when you bid somewhere, you have a contract that's somewhere below a game level. Game contracts score better than partial contracts because of the bonus involved when you make your contract. Major suit contracts score better than minor suit contracts. So, as an example of that, let's say that you and your partner are seated across from each other. You've looked at your cards, you're bidding, and somehow in the auction, you figure out that you in fact have a heart fit and you have a diamond fit. How do you know which way to go? Well, major suits score better. We love them. They score best. And here's an example of that. 4 hearts, making 4. Let's make sure we understand what that means. When we say that you're in 4 hearts and you make 4, what we're saying is you took 4 tricks above book. Remember our old friend book? Book are the first 6 winning tricks that you as declarer take. You have to take at least 6 winning tricks just to hold your head up high when you go into ShopRite, right? You have to take 6 winning tricks just to be near the threshold of halfway. You don't get the majority of winning tricks till you tip over into 7 tricks. So book plus 4, the number of tricks you must take to be successful is always book plus the level, the number in your contract. So if we're in 4 hearts, we have to take book plus 4, 6 plus 4, or 10 tricks. Okay, so we have to take 10 tricks and 4 hearts, and we announce the outcome as making 4 above book. Now, if you're not vulnerable, I'm going to tell you that score, I know it off the top of my head, happens all the time, plus 420 if you're not vulnerable. And we're going to talk in a minute about how you calculate that. When you get your handout from me and your video link to this lesson, I'm also going to give you a link to something called the ACBL Instant Scorer, something you can download from the ACBL, the American Contract Bridge League. It will tell you every score that you can earn in bridge on any contract with any number of tricks you've taken. It'll also tell you if you don't make your contract, how to calculate that. But it will actually give you the actual scores. You don't have to do the calculation, it's there. But I want you to learn the calculation. So 4 hearts making 4, not vulnerable, would be a score of 420. That's a major suit. And my arrows are off here, I'm sorry. What if you were in 4 diamonds? Remember I said you had a diamond fit. 4 diamonds making the same 4, the same 10 tricks, not vulnerable. Your score would be 130 points. Notice the difference. First of all, one of those contracts is a game contract, 4 hearts. 4 diamonds is not game, is it? The game level in diamonds is the 5 level. So you're not even in a full game contract. You're in a partial contract. Notice how badly minor suits compare to major suits in the scoring. But what if I leveled that out a little bit? Suppose instead I said, all right, what if I made both of these options a game option? You had hearts together, you had diamonds together, and you were going to choose which game to play in, 4 hearts or 5 diamonds. Well, 4 hearts making 4, non-vulnerable, is still plus 420. I will tell you that 5 diamonds making 5, that's 11 tricks, not vulnerable, is a score of plus 400. Here's the problem. Minor suits don't score well, and if you go to 5 diamonds, you must take 11 tricks, book plus 5, in order to be successful. And I'm going to tell you that the difference between taking 10 tricks and taking 11 tricks is actually a pretty big ability level. It is harder to move from 10 winning tricks to 11 winning tricks than you think. You can only lose 2 tricks. And the increment, that even though it's only 1 more trick, it is much harder to take 11 tricks than it is to take 10 tricks. We don't like bidding at the 5 level. Game in the minor suits is the 5 level. And then you don't even get a decent score. Whenever possible, you want to go for a major suit fit. So what we're going to do now is we're going to actually calculate raw scores. And I want to start with the hand you have on page 4 in your packet. All right. I want you to start on the first hand you see. And that first hand is labeled hand 4. And you can see it on my screen, right? You see it on my screen. Notice this is like a lot of other hand record samples I've sent you in classes. If you look in the upper corner of this hand, you'll notice the board number, board 4. You'll notice who the dealer was. And oh, look, vulnerability. It's telling you that everybody, all 4 of you, are vulnerable on this hand. So you will know from a hand record after the game who was vulnerable, who wasn't, so that you can remember. You won't have to remember was I vulnerable or not. It'll say it right in the hand record. Now, if you look at this hand, I want you to notice that north and south have a spade fit, don't they? They have a 9-card spade fit. That's nice. If you look at east and west, do you notice they have a 9-card diamond fit? Oh, that's interesting. Both partnerships have their own 9-card fits. If you look at the point count in the lower left-hand corner, notice that nobody adds up across the table from each other to 25 points, do they? East and west have 21 points together. North and south have 19. That's not a big difference. They are both hovering right around 20 points together. So now what we have are 2 partnerships who have roughly the same partnership points. They both have a 9-card fit, and now they're duking it out. Who wants the contract more? And this happens a lot in bridge. And I'm using this as our example so that you can really see that this is first of all, a competitive game. And secondly, how the scoring is impacted by the interest in the competition. So we're going to take a look at this hand, and I'm going to go on use the chart that you have on your next page to talk through the information on this board. You also need page 1 on your side. On page 1, I want you to notice at the top of the page, when you make your contract, in order for you to get your raw score, declarers, when you are successful, you are going to add up something called trick points and something called bonus points. Trick points are the number of points you give yourself for every trick you take above book. All right? You have to take the book, that's just it. But for every trick you take above book, you give yourself points. Okay? Now, this is only if you actually make your contract. Major suits are 30 points per trick. Minor suits are only 20 points per trick. So already you start to see why minor suits don't score as well. Hey, look at no trump. No trump scores 30 points per trick as well, just like majors. But when you play in a no trump contract, game or not, at the end of calculating trick points, you hand yourself 10 extra points. We like to say it's because you get 10 extra points for being brave enough to play without a trump suit. Okay? Now, you get trick points when you make your contract, and then you get bonus points. If you had bid a game, you get a big bonus, hundreds of points. If you are not vulnerable declarers, you get 300 more points. If you are vulnerable, you get 500 more points on top of your trick points. If you're in a partial contract, not quite game, and you make your contract, it won't matter whether you're vulnerable or not. You just get 50 extra bonus points. That's it. Now, on the bottom of that page, when you don't make your contract, you are going to give the opponents a positive score. How do you do that? Well, basically, you're calculating how you performed, declarer, and when you go down in a contract, you have to give the opponents a certain number of points for every trick you are down. Now, this does not have anything to do with book. This is strictly when you don't make your contract, you have to say to yourself, how many was I supposed to make? In 4 hearts, I need 10 tricks. If I don't take 10 tricks, how many am I off? How many am I down from 10? If you're down 1 and not vulnerable, you give the opponents plus 50 points. If you're down 2 not vulnerable, you would give them plus 50 plus 50 plus 100. If you're vulnerable, you start off with giving them 100 points per trick. So let's go to the chart on the next page. And I want to talk about what you see here. And what you see here is an example of what we would do in a live bridge club if we were going to score on paper. I said earlier that our lower level games in a live bridge club always scored on paper because I wanted to teach them the process of how scoring works. They would have to do the calculation right at the table at the end of the hand. Okay. And often at the end of the hand, you see all 4 people going, no, no, no. If you add that, that's that. No, 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 that's not what that is. Everybody's doing the math at the table. Now, if you're a slightly higher level group, you would get a handheld little calculator and you would plug it in and the calculator would do the work behind the scenes. But you have to plug it in correctly for the calculator to do its job right. In the digital world, you don't have to do any of that. The system knows your outcome as soon as the hand is finished. It does every bit of the work in the background and you don't know how it did it. So that's why we're practicing this way. I'm using the paper version of you actually doing the calculation so that you can see how the sausage is made, essentially. Okay, so as you're looking at this chart, the first thing I want you to remember is that we're talking about board 4. That was what was on the previous page, right? Board 4. Now, it also told you the dealer was west. And remember, it told you that everyone was vulnerable, right? Because that's going to impact scoring. Now, the next thing you see, and this is what the computer is starting to work on, the computer needs to know what your contract was. So this column under contract is on board 4, every table that played board 4, line by line, what they bid as a contract. So this is how everybody in the room bid board 4, table by table. Okay. Then the made column is, well, who was the declarer on this board? The made and down columns are whether or not you actually make your contract or whether you went down in your contract. All right. Now, one of the things you'll find in bridge and in different bridge systems, BBO, Shark, Fun Bridge, lots of different ones, They will show you different ways of showing what your total is when you make your contract. I'm showing you what we used in the live club. I'm showing you what is considered usually the standard. And that is, if you look at the first line, 3 spades was the contract. North was the declare, made 3. That means that North took 3 tricks above book, right? 6 plus 3 took 9 total tricks, 3 above book. That's making the contract, 3 making 3. All right, that's why it looks like that, above book. So what I like to do is some of these with you, and I'm going to let you do, after a while, I'll let you fill in some things without me, but I want to walk through this process. Some of you already may know how to do this, and I'm going to ask you to just be patient because there are a lot of people watching this who have never thought about this before or done it. They've never been even in a live bridge club. But it would be good review for those of you who think you know what it is anyway. So here we go. I want to look at the very first line. Now remember, we are in a room, and I'm going to tell you we have 7 tables in the room, and that's why we have 7 lines on this chart. Okay? 7 tables played board 4, and each line of this chart identifies a specific table. Now, when you come into a bridge game, some of you may not realize this, but as we continue forward, I'm going to start pointing it out when we are playing together in BBO or in different places. Even in Shark, I'm going to start pointing it out. When you sit down at the bridge table at the beginning of a game, whether you're in a live game or a digital game, you get a pair number. And your pair number is either north, south, or east, west. It depends what your seat is. And then it is the number of the very first table at which you start to play. So if you're north-south and you are north-south at table number 1, you're north-south 1. If you come into the bridge club or you sit down in a Shark lesson and at the bottom it says your table number 4 and you're north-south, your pair number is north-south 4. Likewise, east-west. If you come into a bridge club or go into Shark or BBO and you're seated at the very first round of the play, you're seated at table 7, you are east-west 7 for the entire game. The other thing I'm hoping you actually figure out by now, certainly from our BBO lab games, if nothing else, is that when we play in a bridge environment like BBO, you play a couple of boards with a set of opponents, and then you move to a new table. North-south never moves. North-south is always in the same place. East-west are the people who end up moving from table to table. You get new opponents. You have to figure out who their pair number is. So when you look at the far right here on this chart, the computer has to know that north-south 1 played against east-west 7 on board 4. And they will know that because they will know at which table you started. It's all computerized. So let's take a look at how to turn this into raw scores. Are you ready? Line 1. On line 1, Daffy and Bugs are north-south pair 1. It says it on the far right. And they're playing opposite east-west pair 7, Mickey and Goofy. Now notice that the contract is 3 spades. The declare is north. Now that's either Daffy or Bugs. I don't know who, and it doesn't matter. But north was the declare in 3 spades. And it says that north did in fact take the 9 tricks needed. 3 spades by north-south. Making 3 means Daffy and Bugs did take their required 9 tricks, 3 above book. Now that means that north-south is going to receive a positive raw score. And if you look at page 1 at the top, when you make your contract, you have to start calculating trick points. Trick points, 30 trick points for every trick above book. So you made 3 above book times 30, that's 90 trick points, but we're not done. Now, because we made our contract, we add bonus points. Now you're not in a game. You're going to give yourself a partial game bonus, and vulnerability doesn't matter there. It's a straightforward 50 extra points for just being successful. So now, what is the raw score? And this is again from declarer's perspective. Our declarer was north. In the north-south column, because you were successful, we're going to put the total raw score. 90 trick points plus 50 partial bonus points is positive 140 for north-south. So if we were writing this on paper, and what goes on in the computer if you're digital, is the computer calculates that North-South's raw score is plus 140. So far, so good. Is that straightforward? Let's continue. If we go to line 2, Harry Potter and Ron Weasley are North-South. They played against Hermione Granger and Ginny Weasley. They have their own pair numbers, right? Now, on this case, it's the exact same contract, isn't it? And the exact same outcome. So nobody should be surprised that it's the exact same positive score in the North-South column on line 2. Remember, you play different opponents on every round. If this were board 9, Harry and Ron would still be seated at North-South at table 6, but they would get a different set of opponents, a different pair number, East-West. Now, we're still on board 4. These are all the scores on board 4. I want to go to the third line. Now, on the third line, something different has happened. Remember, we started with saying North and South had a spade fit and East and West had a diamond fit? Well, on this table, all right, we're at table number 5 with North-South 5, Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker. They did not go to 3 spades. They let East-West play in 3 diamonds. I don't know why, but they did. It happens all the time. Maybe they got fraidy scared and didn't want to bid higher. But they let Obi-Wan and R2-D2 play in 3 diamonds. But look what happened. Obi-Wan and R2-D2 did not make their contract. They needed 9 tricks in 3 diamonds. They are down 1, which means instead of 9 tricks, they only took 8. They are down 1. Now, if East-West played this contract in diamonds and didn't make it, and they're down 1, they have to give the opponents a positive score. Has nothing to do with book here, right? It's just how many tricks you're off of what you were supposed to take. And if you look at the bottom of page 1, it'll tell you that you're going to hand the opponents some amount of points. Now, it's not the same kind of scale as when you make your contract. They're not hundreds and hundreds of extra points that the opponents get. Oh, no, 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 no. They just get a little award for having stopped you from making your contract. Now, when you are vulnerable, and everybody is on the board 4, and you are down 1, you have to give the opponents plus 100, right? Doesn't matter whether you're in game or not, but vulnerability does matter when you're down. If you are vulnerable and down 1, it's 100 points for the opponents. Now, East-West with a declarant and dummy, they have to give the plus 100 in the North-South column. So far, so good? All right, let's look at the next line. Well, for whatever reason, on this one, Captain America and the Hulk said, you know what? I'm not going to let North-South play in spades. I'll bet North-South went to 3 spades. And East and West said, I'm sorry, it's Thor and Iron Man who are doing this. East and West said, no, I'm not letting Captain America and the Hulk play in 3 spades. Iron Man and Thor, they went to 4 diamonds, East-West. And they didn't do well, did they? They're down 2. They needed 10 tricks, but they're off by 2. They only took 8 tricks. Same thing applies. When you're down in a contract, it doesn't matter what the contract was. 4 diamonds, 7 no trump, 1 heart. Down is down. How many tricks are you off what you were supposed to take? Now you're down 2, East-West. You're vulnerable, 100 points per trick. You're going to give North and South 200 points on this. Ugh. All right, let's go look at the next line. Hepburn and Tracy are North-South 2. They're playing against Cary Grant and Ingrid Bergman, East-West 1. Now on this one, I don't know what went wrong here. North and South didn't go very far in their spade fit, did they? I don't know why. They let East-West play in 2 diamonds. Well, I don't know why. Doesn't matter. And then East and West took 10 tricks. Again, I don't know how. Maybe North and South had bad defense. I don't know. But East and West are declare and dummy in 2 diamonds, and they made 4. That means 6 above, 4 above book, 10 tricks. They were successful in East-West. So East-West is going to do the calculation, right? So how do they do the calculation? Well, this is a minor suit, isn't it? Ugh. 4 tricks above book times 20 is 80 trick points. Okay. But now we've got to add a bonus in. They are not in game. 4 diamonds is not game. 2 diamonds is not game. And even though they made a lot of tricks, doesn't matter. They didn't bid a game. They get a partial bonus of plus 50. 80 plus 50 is 130. This goes in the declarers column, east-west. They were the ones who were successful with their contract. So far, so good? Let's go look at line 6. Charlie Brown and Snoopy are north-south 3. They're playing against Linus and Lucy, east-west 2. It looks like Charlie Brown and Snoopy went all the way to 4 spades for whatever reason. Again, I don't know why. They're back to a spade contract, but they didn't make it, did they? They didn't take the 10 tricks they needed. They took 9. They are down 1. That's a shame. They are vulnerable. North and south are down 1 vulnerable. They have to give 100 points to east-west. Now let's look at the last line. Fred and Barney are north-south 4. Wilma and Betty are east-west 3. 3 spades by Fred and Barney. I don't know which one is declared, but one of them is. Holy cow, what the heck happened there? That didn't go well. They're down 3 in 3 spades. They only took 6 tricks. We're not going to speak of it again, okay, Fred and Barney? We're just not going to talk about it. Sometimes you just have one of these boards. So how do you figure that out? Well, they're down in the contract. They're off by 3. They're vulnerable. 100 points per trick down. They have to give Wilma and Betty in east-west plus 300. I don't want to be in that house tonight. That's not going to go well, is it? So what we've just calculated are the positive scores. Those are all of our positive scores. If you're the declarer and you make your contract, you get the positive score. If you're the declarer and you don't make your contract, you give the opponents the positive score, but we're not done. Because when you play a bridge hand, every pair gets a raw score. Doesn't matter whether you're declare or dummy. Every time one pair earns a positive score, their opponents earn the negative of that score. So I'm going to start filling that in for you here. Can you see what I've done? Every positive score gets the negative of that score. Every pair, whether they're north, south, or east, west, get a score. Now, where we're going to do is one final piece for today, and then we're going to take all of this stuff into next week. But what I want you to think about here is, again, who your actual competitors are. The north-souths are all competing against each other. The east-wests are all competing against each other, even if they were always defender. They have to defend well. They have to do their best job stopping declarer. That's going to determine their score as well. All right. So your real opponents are not really your real competitors are not really the opponents on either side of you. Sure, you want to beat them, but your real competitors are the other people in your same seat. So if you're north-south, you're playing against the north-souths. So what I'd like you to do is look at all the raw scores in north-south column right now. Your goal is to earn the highest positive score you can, especially if you were the declarer, right? But everybody wants to earn a positive score. So now looking at the column on my screen for north-south's raw scores, which north-south pair earned the highest positive score? I think it was north-south 7, Captain America and the Hulk. You see that plus 200? Now, I'm going to remind you that Captain America and the Hulk, north-south, were not the declarers. Look at the contract. It was an east-west contract, but east-west didn't do well. So they handed north and south a big positive score. So you don't have to be the declarer to get a big positive score. You can be a defender, and either you defend extremely well and really shut down the declarer, or the declarer's having a momentary brain freeze and doesn't play the hand well and goes down. So I think Captain America and the Hulk have the highest positive score in the north-south column. They were handed 200 points by Thor and Iron Man, who didn't make their contract, right? Okay. Again, I want you to look at the north-south column. Negative scores are not always bad. And when you get the handout from me late tonight, you're going to have a couple more hands to do without me. And you'll see in some of those examples, because you get a narrative with the answers as well, you're going to see that negative scores are not always bad. And in next week's lesson, you're going to see it even more clearly. Which north-south pair earned the lowest negative score? I think it was Fred and Barney, right? On the last line, they didn't do so well. They were declare and dummy. They did not play the hand well, did they? Ugh, something went wrong. They didn't make their contract. They gave their wives a plus 300, which means they earned the negative of that, negative 300. Next week, what we're going to do is we're going to take these raw scores and talk about why it matters we cannot leave it just there, why we will have to convert it into something else. Now, we just talked about north and south. What about east and west? You always hope for a positive score, even if you're not the declarer. Which east-west pair earned the highest positive score? I think it's Wilma and Betty on the last line, right? They were declare and dummy. I mean, they were defenders. Fred and Barney were declare and dummy. But Fred and Barney didn't do well, and Betty and Wilma benefited from Fred and Barney's errors, okay? They get 300 plus 300 for just defending. And again, I don't want to be a fly on either of those houses' walls tonight when they go home. That's not going to be a good conversation. So this is a competition. You are trying to play as well as you can, whether you're on defense or you're the declarer. If you're the declarer, you want to squeeze every trick out of your play. If you're on defense, you want to stop the declarer from even making his or her contract. And that's how your partnership does well. Now, we're going to talk about master points in 2 weeks. Master points are awards that you earn when you play in a sanctioned game. Our lab games are sanctioned games. Okay, we're going to talk about how master points are a measure of who you are as a bridge player. And because you play in master point games, you really do want to perform well. This is a competition. So we'll talk in 2 weeks about, if you're not already playing in our low level sanctioned games, whether or not you want to get into this competitive aspect. I'll talk to you about having an ACBL member number and help you with that if you need one. You can even start doing this very soon. I'm getting a lot of you ready to start doing this. And we'll discuss more about these Master Point Awards 2 weeks from today. So where are we now? I'm done with the bulk of tonight's lesson. So let me just do a quick closeout, and then I'm going to mention something else. We just did a calculation of raw scoring on a board. We have more work to do with this because the raw score cannot be the final total. I'll tell you why. One reason. Suppose on a board, North-South did amazingly well, and they earned this weird score of something like 790 points on that board. And no other North-South came anywhere near that because, I don't know, a fluke or it really did work for them. And then let's say on the next board, North and South get another huge score, 680 points. Here's the problem. If all we ever did to get a total score at the end of the game was add up these raw scores in a row, what happens is that North-South pair who had 2 amazing boards pulled away from the pack. Every other North-South is way down here in their raw scores, and that pair is way up here. That would not be fair throughout the game. There has to be a way to level the playing field every single board. After every board, we got to set everybody back to a level playing field. So next week, we're going to talk about that, and we're going to take board 4 into that conversation. We're going to do something called match pointing, and we're going to talk about how to calculate your total score at the end of a game and how to calculate your percentage of how well you did. And then in our 3rd week, we're going to take that even further. We're going to talk about something called stratification. We're going to talk about how you earn Master Point awards from the ACBL. We're going to talk about how you compare against other players at the end of a game. So that brings us to the end of our first workshop on scoring and the end of our first video on scoring. So I'm hoping you got from this video the idea that the first step in learning to understand how scoring works is to manage to calculate a raw score at the end of every board. In upcoming workshops, we're going to take this raw score information and we're going to feed it into the next step, which is a way that we will level the playing field across the boards so that every pair has a fair chance from the beginning of a game to the end of a game to perform really well. If you have any questions about information in this video or any of the handouts that you may have downloaded, feel free to ask. Bye now.